They laughed when she asked to use the shooting range. But they didn't know who she was. Laughter echoed through the officers' club at Naval Station Coronado. Colonel Bradford Vaughn had just pointed at the little girl in front of him, smirking. As he mocked her, she had asked politely if she could use the base's shooting range. Instead of answering with respect, Vaughn turned to the other SEALs around him and said, "Little girls like her should stick to dolls. Guns aren't for them." They laughed with him, not because it was funny, but because he was a senior officer, and that's what people do. But none of them knew the truth. This wasn't a little girl with a big imagination. This was Penelope Sky Morrison, daughter of one of the Navy's most elite snipers. Her mother, Lieutenant Nicole Morrison, had trained her in secret since she was 7 years old. Every lesson, every breath, every trigger pull, passed down like a sacred skill. And today, the 3rd anniversary of her mother's death, Penelope had come to honor her memory in the way they both knew best. By picking up a rifle. That morning, thick fog rolled in from the Pacific Ocean. It wrapped around the Spanish-style buildings of the naval base, curling like smoke through the walkways, and casting shadows over the stone paths. Penelope walked beside her father, Kevin Morrison, holding tightly to a worn leather case. It wasn't a toy. It was everything she had left of her mother. She was just 12 years old, but even grown men stopped to look as she passed. Not because she tried to stand out, but because she moved with a quiet calm that felt too mature for her age. Those who noticed it assumed it came from grief. They weren't wrong. Kevin looked down at his daughter, a wave of emotion crossing his face. He was 42 now, dressed in the uniform of a civilian maintenance supervisor. But his posture still showed signs of his past, a man who had once served as a Navy SEAL, a man who had faced danger in places with names no one could pronounce. After Nicole died during a classified mission, Kevin left active duty, not because he wanted to, but because someone had to be there for Penelope, and he didn't hesitate. Now, as they walked the base together, Kevin leaned down slightly and said, "Remember what we talked about, kiddo. Not everyone is going to understand why you want to do this." Penelope reached up and touched the silver pendant around her neck. It was a tiny trident. Her mother's. "I remember," she said softly. "But Mom always said if you don't keep practicing, you lose your edge." Kevin smiled. She sounded just like her. The officers' club was busy, as it always was on a Monday morning. Off-duty personnel sipped coffee, filled their plates, and prepared for another week. The building felt like a museum and a lounge mixed together. Ship wheels hung on the walls, anchors, old photos of battles, fought long before Penelope was born. She had always loved it here. It made her feel close to her mother. Near the main dining area, a group of SEALs had gathered around Colonel Vaughn. He was telling a story, his voice booming across the room. At the 18th hole, he was saying, "This guy, weekend warrior, starts giving me advice about my swing. 25 years in the Navy, and this guy thinks he knows better than me." The younger SEALs chuckled politely. Sergeant Trent Hayes was among them. Fresh from deployment, 29 years old, with an easygoing smile. Next to him stood Corporal Danielle Reed, still new to the special ops world, and still figuring out how things worked. As Vaughn went on with his story, his eyes suddenly caught something. A little girl, standing alone near a display of historic Navy weapons and medals. Her eyes scanned the glass with quiet fascination. Vaughn's mood shifted. His tone changed. Well, he said loudly, enough for everyone nearby to hear. "What do we have here?" Penelope looked up slowly, immediately, recognizing the tone. She had heard it before, from adults who didn't think she belonged. Vaughn walked over to her, shoes clicking sharply on the tile. "You know this is the officers' club, right? Not a museum for kids." Penelope met his eyes calmly. Yes, sir, she said. My dad's here to turn in his weekly reports. I was just waiting. Vaughn's eyes dropped to the leather case in her hand. What's in that? He asked, loud enough to make others stop and watch. That's not a toy, is it? They doubted her because she was young. He mocked her because she was quiet. But she had her mother's eyes, and they didn't flinch. Colonel Vaughn was still grinning when his gaze landed on Penelope again. She had wandered a few steps away from her father to look at the glass display case near the entrance of the officers' club. Inside were historical Navy weapons, medals, and black and white photos. She stared at them with a quiet sort of awe. Vaughn's grin faded. He didn't like seeing someone like her in a place like this. He turned toward her and raised his voice, just enough for the nearby officers to hear. Well, well, he said with a fake chuckle. What do we have here? Penelope looked up from the glass case, instantly recognizing the tone adults used right before they said something rude. She'd heard it a lot these past 3 years. She didn't look away. She stood still, her fingers brushing the trident, pendant around her neck. Vaughn walked toward her with loud, sharp steps. His shoes clacked on the tile floor like a warning. You do know this is the officers' club, right? Not a tourist stop, he said, eyebrows raised. Penelope felt her cheeks grow hot, but she didn't lower her eyes. Yes, sir, she said. My dad is turning in reports. I was just waiting. Vaughn's gaze dropped to the leather case in her hands. What's in that? He asked, voice louder now. Doesn't look like a toy. Pretty serious looking for a little girl. Conversations around the room started to die down. Heads turned. People leaned in. Kevin Morrison heard the voice shift and left his meeting with Major Wright without hesitation. He was already walking toward the sound before Vaughn's next question. But Penelope didn't need rescuing. Her voice rang clear. It's my shooting kit, sir. The room stilled. Some soldiers raised their eyebrows. Others stifled laughs. Vaughn didn't smile. Instead, he stepped even closer, expression hardening. A shooting kit? He repeated, his tone full of disbelief. So Daddy lets you play with real guns now, does he? Before Penelope could respond, Kevin stepped in. Colonel Vaughn, he said evenly, forcing calm into his tone. I think there's a misunderstanding. Vaughn turned to face him. He looked over Kevin's uniform, plain, maintenance crew, and instantly decided he wasn't worth listening to. No misunderstanding at all, Vaughn said coldly. Your daughter is in a restricted area talking about firearms like she's some kind of expert. That's not just inappropriate. It reflects badly on our families. The words cut deep. Kevin felt his jaw tighten, every part of him screaming to defend her, but he also knew the weight Vaughn carried. One bad report, and Kevin's job, his contract, his clearance, could all be gone. But then he looked at his daughter, and she didn't need him to fight this one. Penelope has been trained, Kevin said carefully, in full firearm safety. She's not playing. Her mother, Lieutenant Nicole Morrison, started teaching her when she was 7. At the sound of that name, Vaughn squinted. Nicole Morrison? He said slowly, as if trying to search his memory. Doesn't ring a bell. Admin or food services? Penelope flinched. Kevin froze. He had expected pushback, but not disrespect. Nicole Morrison wasn't just a name. She had been one of the Navy's most decorated snipers. Her service record was sealed for a reason. Her missions were classified. Her skills had saved lives from across oceans. She had worn the trident with pride, and this man had just dismissed her like she was a cafeteria worker. Penelope's voice cut through the silence. My mother was a Navy sniper, she said firmly. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just steady. The kind of voice that didn't ask for approval. The kind that stated facts. Several of the officers in the room shifted awkwardly. At least a few of them remembered the name now. Nicole Morrison, the woman with 1,000-yard accuracy and calm nerves under fire. The SEAL who had trained alongside the best and earned her spot through grit and blood. She served with honor, Kevin added, keeping his tone measured. And she trained Penelope herself. Vaughn's lip curled. That doesn't mean she belongs on a shooting range. This is a military installation, not a family day event. But this time, the silence that followed wasn't in his favor, because somewhere behind them, another voice had entered the conversation. A voice with weight. Equals she didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. But with every word she spoke, the room began to shift. Colonel Vaughn's mocking tone still hung in the air, when a calm but firm voice interrupted from across the room. Is there a problem here regarding marksmanship training? Everyone turned. Captain Miles Foster had been sitting nearby, quietly sipping his coffee while going over range schedules. At 35, he was the safety officer at Precision Point Range, a man who had spent his career around firearms and serious shooters. His ears had caught the word sniper, and now he was interested. He stepped forward, face neutral, but eyes alert. Captain Foster, Vaughn said, annoyed. This little girl claims her mother was some kind of Navy sniper, and that she's been trained to shoot. I was just explaining to her father that children shouldn't make up stories about military service. Foster looked at Penelope, then at Kevin Morrison, then back at the girl again. He noticed her posture, her stillness, the way she didn't fidget. Miss Morrison, he said gently, can I ask what kind of training you've received? Penelope straightened slightly. My mom started with safety, she said. How to clear a weapon, check chambers, identify parts. Then we moved to sight alignment, breathing, trigger control, and long-range estimation. After that, precision shooting at increasing distances. Captain Foster blinked. The answer was clean. Precise, no guessing. No bluff, he'd interviewed active duty personnel who couldn't explain it that clearly. He decided to go one step further. What platforms have you trained with? He asked. Mostly bolt-action rifles, she said, without missing a beat. Some semi-automatics. But my mom said until my fundamentals became automatic, there was no need to switch styles. That answer made several heads turn. No one had told her what to say. And she wasn't bragging. She was just answering. Foster's interest deepened. At that moment, a new figure entered the room. Master, Chief Stephanie Cross. Word had reached her that something unusual was happening in the officers' club. Something about a civilian child, talking weapons training and a possible conflict with higher-ranking personnel. At 38, Cross was a legend in the Navy's marksmanship world. Combat tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. Dozens of confirmed operations. She didn't just teach snipers. She created them. She moved through the crowd with a quiet power, scanning the scene quickly before her eyes landed on Penelope. She stopped. Then, something clicked. Lieutenant Nicole Morrison, she said quietly. Phantom 7, 1st Marine Expeditionary Force. Best natural shooter I ever worked with. Kevin Morrison froze. He wasn't expecting anyone here to know Nicole, let alone remember her call sign, unit, and reputation. Penelope's breath caught. You knew her? She asked. I did, Cross said, her expression softening. She could put 5 rounds through a quarter at 400 meters, in wind, dust, even rain. She saved lives because of that skill, including mine. The room went silent. Vaughn looked uncomfortable. He had just spent 10 minutes mocking a child, and now stood corrected by one of the Navy's most respected experts. Master Chief, he said carefully, I wasn't aware you had served with supposed sniper personnel during active combat. That word, supposed, didn't sit Well, with cross dot, her voice dropped an octave. There was nothing supposed about Lieutenant Morrison, she said. She died during a classified mission. I can't tell you where, but I can tell you 12 Marines are alive today because she stayed behind with the scope and held the line. Her words struck deep. The tone, the clarity, the authority. It was no longer a debate, yet it was fact. Cross turned to Penelope, eyes softening again. Your mom trained you? Yes, ma'am, Penelope said. She started when I was 7. She said if I was going to inherit the skill, I had to inherit the discipline too. Cross nodded. She would have said that. Foster cleared his throat. Well, it seems we're no longer talking about imaginary training. Miss Morrison, would you like to show us what you've learned? Penelope's eyes lit up. I'd like that very much. Vaughn tried to protest. This isn't a summer camp. Letting a child onto a live fire range, but Cross cut him off. She be supervised, and she's already shown more poise than some recruits I've trained. Foster looked around. I'll take full responsibility. We'll begin with the 25-meter range. Iron sights. Standard Navy qualification drill. Kevin put a hand on his daughter's shoulder. You sure? She nodded. I've been ready for this since the day she taught me how to hold a rifle. She didn't ask for respect. She came to earn it. The air inside the officers' lounge had gone stiff. Colonel Vaughn, who had been loudly mocking a child moments ago, now found himself under quiet judgment from the very people who once laughed with him. He had ridiculed the daughter of a fallen war hero, and now Master Chief Cross had confirmed exactly who that hero was. Penelope felt something shift deep inside her. She'd always believed her mother's legacy mattered, but hearing it recognized, truly, officially, by someone like Cross made everything feel real. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was history, and she was part of it. She stepped forward with quiet confidence. Master Chief, she said, would it be possible for me to use precision point range today? I'd like to honor my mom by practicing the skills she passed on to me. The request came out so respectfully, so calmly, it caught everyone off guard. Vaughn took a second to process it. When he did, his face twisted into that same smirk. Oh, really? He said, drawing out each word like a joke. The little girl wants to play soldier on a live fire range. What's next? You going to join SEAL Team 5 next week? The mockery sparked visible discomfort. A few SEALs shifted where they stood. No one laughed this time. Cross stepped closer. Colonel, she said firmly, if Miss Morrison has received proper training and is under supervision, there's no regulation stopping her from accessing the range. Vaughn turned toward her in disbelief. You're seriously suggesting, he said, voice sharp, that we let a 12-year-old girl use military weapons? Because of what? Bedtime stories from her dead mother? The room tensed. Every person in that space felt the slap in those words. Cold, cruel, unnecessary. Kevin's hands clenched into fists. He didn't move. Not yet. But his jaw tightened like steel. Even Penelope's hands trembled slightly for the first time. But she didn't speak. Not yet. Cross, however, did. Colonel, she said, voice dangerously low, I suggest you reconsider both your tone and your assumptions. Before Vaughn could respond, Penelope stepped forward again. Her voice cut through the tension. Like a knife, Colonel Vaughn, she said, calm and clear. If you don't believe my mother taught me anything useful, I'd be happy to show you what I learned. You could hear a pin drop. A 12-year-old girl had just challenged a commanding officer, not with attitude, but with confidence. It wasn't disrespect, it was discipline. And it rattled Vaughn more than yelling ever could. He blinked, realizing the room was watching him now, not as a leader, but as a man losing control of the moment. Then he smiled. It wasn't kind. You know what? he said with fake excitement. Let's do it. Let's see what kind of sniper school bedtime training looks like. Captain Foster, nearby, frowned deeply. Colonel, he said carefully, if this is going to happen, it needs to follow full safety protocol. Proper range rules, supervised. No exceptions. Of course, Vaughn agreed too quickly. Full protocol. Let's get it on the books and give everyone a chance to witness what happens when a child plays with grown-up tools. Cross looked at Penelope. Why? Her voice dropped low. Miss Morrison, once we start, there's no turning back. Are you absolutely sure? Penelope turned to her father. For a brief moment, doubt flickered in her eyes, not because she lacked skill, but because she saw the fear in him. He had spent the last 3 years trying to protect her from exactly this kind of moment. Public attention, pressure, judgment. But if she walked away now, Vaughn's words would follow her forever. Dad, she said softly, I want to do this. Kevin looked at her. What he saw wasn't just his daughter. It was her mother's spirit. That same unshakable focus Nicole had carried into combat now stared back at him through his child's eyes. His chest tightened, but he nodded. All right, he said. Then he turned to Vaughn, and his voice carried something new, not anger, not fear. Challenge. They walked her to the range expecting a lesson. They didn't know she was about to give one. Let's go to the range, Colonel Vaughn said smugly, hoping this spectacle would prove his point. Penelope walked beside Master Chief Cross, her grip tight on the rifle case. But her face didn't show fear. It showed purpose, calm, like this was where she was always meant to be. The air outside was starting to clear. The ocean breeze rolled over the coast as the fog lifted, revealing the vast stretch of blue beyond the hills. For Penelope, it wasn't just about shooting. It was about honoring her mother. And she was going to do it the only way she knew how. Back in the courtyard, Vaughn was still cracking jokes. She's gonna miss the target completely, he said to a few soldiers nearby. Maybe we should bring out a toy rifle so she feels more comfortable. People chuckled, but their laughter was less confident now. There was something about the way Penelope walked. She didn't shrink back. She didn't hide. It felt like she was walking toward something bigger than just a shooting test. The group moved steadily toward the precision point range, a massive facility nestled in the valley between two ridges. Concrete shooting platforms lined the hills, each connected to steel targets that stretched all the way out to 800 meters. From basic training to advanced sniper drills, this was the real thing. Base workers paused to watch the group pass. It was rare to see a crowd heading to the range like this. Rarer still to see a young civilian girl in the center of it all. Master Chief Cross walked confidently. She didn't say much, but her presence spoke volumes. Colonel Vaughn marched beside her, trying to look like he was still in charge by talking louder and throwing out sarcastic remarks. I want to make something clear, Vaughn called out. This is not about proving some fantasy. It's about showing why military. Weapons are for trained professionals, not children. The crowd following them grew. Lieutenant Knox West joined as they walked. Fresh off advanced marksmanship instructor school, he had the kind of technical mind perfect for evaluating long-range shooting. He wasn't there to judge, just observe. If we're doing a real evaluation, West said, shouldn't we have clear criteria for what counts as a pass or fail? Vaughn blinked. He hadn't expected anyone to take Penelope seriously, let alone measure her performance. I think we'll know failure when we see it, Vaughn replied. It'll be pretty obvious. Penelope stayed quiet. Between her father and Cross, she listened closely as the Master Chief pointed out the unique aspects of the range. These ridgelines create weird wind tunnels, Cross explained. You'll see the flags flutter one way, then suddenly switch. Your mom and I used to sit for hours and read them before we even fired a shot. Penelope nodded. Double quotes. Mom taught me to look for mirage too, she said. She said heat shimmer could tell you more than any scope if you knew what to look for. Lieutenant West glanced over, raising an eyebrow. That wasn't something most adults understood, let alone said so clearly. Commander Rex Murphy, head of one of the base's active SEAL teams, spotted the approaching group. He had been checking equipment when he saw the small crowd forming at the range gate. Murphy was 44, with salt at his temples and the steady look of a man who had seen combat firsthand. He called out to Master Chief Cross as they arrived. Got something unusual going on? Cross gave him a nod. Miss Morrison would like to honor her mother's memory by demonstrating what she's been taught, she said. She'd be using standard gear, full safety protocols in place. Murphy looked at the girl, then at Kevin, then back to Cross. He didn't smile or scoff. He simply nodded. All right, let's get her on the platform. Cross turned to Penelope. This is just another range, she said quietly. Same steps, same breathing, forget the crowd. Just shoot the way she taught you. Penelope unzipped her case and carefully pulled out her rifle. It wasn't shiny. It wasn't flashy. It was clean, simple, and clearly well cared for. The kind of rifle that had seen hours of practice. She stepped onto the platform. The whispers behind her faded. This was her moment. She didn't come to prove them wrong. She came because she was already ready. Commander Murphy stood still, watching Penelope with a critical eye. He wasn't looking for flash or attitude. He was watching for control, focus, and discipline, the traits that matter most when holding a live weapon. Miss Morrison, he asked, what's your experience level with military firearms? Penelope looked him in the eye. I've been training since I was 7. My mom taught me basic safety, breathing, sight alignment, trigger control, and how to adjust for wind and terrain. Murphy paused. He'd trained dozens of young recruits who struggled to explain those things, even after months of instruction. What's the longest shot you've made? 400 meters, she said, with iron sights, bolt-action rifle. But that was 6 months ago. I've grown since then, so my sight picture's different now. The group behind her quieted. That kind of shot was difficult, even for experienced adult marksmen. Vaughn narrowed his eyes. The confidence in her voice was starting to shake his assumptions. From the range control tower, Chief Petty Officer Max Santoro stepped forward. He was 45, with a calm, teacher-like manner and decades of marksmanship training under his belt. His job was turning struggling shooters into steady hands. Commander Murphy, Santoro called, if we're going to evaluate a civilian, especially someone under 18, we should use adjusted safety protocols. Murphy nodded. You're right. Chief Santoro ran a full safety check before we let her handle a weapon. Understood, sir. Santoro approached Penelope slowly and respectfully, speaking not like she was a child, but like she was a trainee. Miss Morrison, he said, I need to check your safety training. We won't go further until I'm confident you understand all the rules. For 15 minutes, Santoro asked her question after question. How to clear a weapon, how to confirm chamber status. How to report a jam. How to identify unsafe backdrops, ricochet risks, and where to stand during live fire. Penelope didn't flinch once. Always visually inspect the chamber and magazine well. Then physically verify with a chamber flag or a finger sweep. Never trust someone else's word. And if a weapon malfunctions, stop. Keep it pointed downrange. Engage the safety if you can. Raise your hand or signal for help. Don't try to fix a jam on your own. Santoro raised his eyebrows. That wasn't just correct, it was textbook perfect. Environmental safety? He asked, check your backstop. Know where the boundaries are. Watch for hard surfaces or strange angles that could bounce rounds back. Always know where other people are. Santoro leaned back. Her answers were better than many adults he'd trained. He saw clear signs that whoever taught her didn't cut corners. They taught her not just how to hit a target, but how not to hurt anyone else. Miss Morrison, he said finally, your safety knowledge is better than a lot of full-grown shooters I've worked with. Who taught you all this? My mom, Penelope said simply. She told me accuracy means nothing if someone gets hurt. The group around them was silent. Not because they didn't know what to say, but because they did. Her mother had raised her right. Dr. Lawrence Pierce arrived. Quietly at the range, clipboard in hand. A military psychologist, Pierce had been asked to observe. Not to stop anything, just to make sure everyone involved was acting responsibly. Chief Santoro, Pierce said, I'll be observing emotional stability, decision-making, and stress management. It's been requested by senior command. Pierce's presence changed the tone. This wasn't a stunt anymore, Doc. It was becoming something official, Doc. Someone high up wanted a record. A psychological record. That meant someone was thinking about long-term possibilities. Colonel Vaughn, watching everything spiral out of his control, crossed his arms in frustration. This is getting ridiculous, he muttered. We're acting like this is some kind of recruitment test. It's just supposed to show why kids don't belong here. Dr. Pierce gave him a calm but direct look. Colonel, he said, comprehensive evaluation protects both the individual and the institution. If this demonstration goes wrong, we'll be asked whether we were thorough. I intend to be. Vaughn didn't respond. The group shifted toward the shooting platform. Penelope opened her rifle case. Inside was a carefully packed bolt-action rifle, a few small tools, a cloth wrap, and a folded diagram with notes scribbled in neat handwriting. Not flashy. Just focus. Captain Foster leaned in slightly. Those are correction sheets, he said, surprised. She's been charting wind drift and elevation. She tracks patterns, Kevin said. Her mom taught her how to read wind like a story. It was time. Penelope stepped toward the bench. Everything around her faded. They gave her 5 rounds to prove a point. She only needed 1. As Penelope laid out her equipment, the mood at precision point range began to shift. The rifle case she carried wasn't just a container, it was a message. Inside were hearing, protection, clear shooting glasses, a spotting scope, a range notebook, and tools for adjusting her sights. Every item had a place. Every tool was clean. Everything was used, not new. This wasn't for show. Lieutenant West leaned in toward Commander Murphy. That's professional-grade gear, he whispered. Whoever trained her didn't just give her a hobby. They built a system. Murphy nodded silently. He watched how carefully Penelope checked each item, how she ran her hands over her scope mounts, and how she marked the wind direction in her notebook. Master Chief Cross stood nearby, watching just as closely. She didn't need anyone to tell her what she was seeing. The way Penelope moved, the care, the focus, the order, it was exactly how Nicole Morrison used to prep before a mission. Nicole always said the shot began before the rifle was touched. It started with the mind. The range stretched out before them. Perfectly groomed grass, wide lanes, sharp lighting. Targets stood at 25, 50, 100, and beyond. The signs marked both yards and meters, meant for both American and international trainees. The fog had lifted completely now. No excuses. Visibility was clear. The light was even. Captain Foster finished prepping the line. We'll start at 25 meters, he said. Supported prone, standard Navy qualification target, 5 shots. Just familiarization. Colonel Vaughn walked up to the viewing area with a smug expression. He wanted a front row seat to what he thought would be a crash. "She miss?" he muttered to a nearby officer. "And when she does, that'll be the end of this fantasy." He didn't whisper. He wanted her to hear. Penelope didn't turn around. Instead, she adjusted her shooting mat, took a deep breath, and looked up at the sky. It was quiet. The kind of quiet that only came before something big. She began her wing check. No gadgets. Just her eyes and the flags posted downrange. 3 miles per hour, she said to herself. Left to right. Consistent. Cross stepped closer, impressed. "You read flags?" she asked softly. "My mom taught me. She said you can hear the wind in the canvas if you listen right." Cross smiled. "She said that to me once in Kandahar." From the sidelines, Lieutenant West took notes. Every step Penelope followed was something he taught. ADULT trainees. And she hadn't missed one. As Foster completed his final checks, Penelope moved into position, prone, supported, elbows tight. Her cheek settled on the stock of her M16. It wasn't a toy. It wasn't ceremonial. It was real. And she looked like she'd been there 100 times before. Everything stopped. The crowd of soldiers and officers went still. Even Vaughn stopped talking. The only sound was the faint seagull cry from the coast. Far in the distance, Foster leaned close. "Take your time, Miss Morrison. No rush." Penelope gave a slow nod. Her breathing began its rhythm, the one her mom taught her. Inhale fully. Exhale. Halfway. Hold. Squeeze. No jerks. No rush. No fear. The trigger moved like it was part of her. The rifle cracked. One clean shot. The sound bounced off the ridgelines. Sharp and final. 20-5 meters downrange. The target shivered. The spotter raised a hand. Center hit. Dead on. Nobody clapped. Not because they weren't impressed, but because they didn't believe what they'd seen. Foster blinked. He walked over to the screen to confirm. Direct bullseye. He announced. The silence deepened. One shot at one target. And she hadn't even flinched. Asterisk. They said it was just luck. So she tightened her grip and made history instead. The shock rang out like a snap of lightning. Commander Murphy, watching through binoculars, called it instantly. Dead center, bullseye, clean hit. The silence that followed was thicker than applause. No cheers. Just the sound of respect building in everyone's mind. Colonel Vaughn, standing stiffly beside the platform, scowled. One shot didn't change anything in his view. "Anyone can get lucky once," he muttered. "With the right gear and no wind, even a rookie can land a center hit." He was trying to save face, but cracks were showing in his voice. "Master Chief." Cross stepped forward, calm as ever. "Miss Morrison," she said, "would you be willing to complete a full qualification string? 5 rounds, measured grouping, standard Navy scoring." "Yes, ma'am," Penelope replied, not lifting her eye from the scope. Her voice didn't shake. She took her time. Each shot came with steady breath, gentle pressure, and the kind of clean break that only comes from hundreds of hours of practice. 5 shots. The grouping was tight, so tight that from a distance, it looked like one wide hole in the target's center. Captain Foster blinked through his optics. Then he gave a low whistle. "That's a 1-inch group at 25 meters, he announced. "That's beyond expert qualification. Flawless." Around the range, even seasoned officers began murmuring. Sergeant Hayes, who'd been skeptical since the start, leaned closer and whispered to Corporal Reed, "I've seen grown men fail that drill." Reed couldn't look away from the target. "That's not training. That's art." Lieutenant West stepped forward. He inspected the grouping himself with practiced precision. "No equipment error," he said. "No chance this is coincidence. That's skill. Pure, repeatable skill." Vaughn crossed his arms tightly. "So she can shoot at 25 meters. That's still short range. Real marksmanship means 300 meters or more. Let's see her shoot when distance and wind start making things complicated." He was grasping, trying to regain control, trying to shift the GOALPOSTS. Dr. Pierce, who had been quietly monitoring Penelope's emotions and stress response, finally spoke up. "Colonel," he said politely, "her performance so far shows advanced regulation under pressure. She's calm, precise, and entirely in control. If we're continuing, let's treat this as a formal evaluation." That left Vaughn with two options: back down or raise the challenge. His pride chose for him. "Let's take her to 300 meters, he said loudly. "Let's see how much of this holds up under real conditions." Cross narrowed her eyes slightly. "Colonel, that range requires gear adjustments, scope recalibration, environmental corrections. It's a different game." "Exactly," Vaughn shot back. "Let's separate real skill from beginner's luck." Penelope finally lifted her head from the rifle. She turned slightly toward her father. Her eyes didn't ask for applause. They asked for permission. Kevin's chest tightened. He'd trained her with Nicole's notes, guided her through endless practice sessions. But now she was asking to go beyond anything they had prepared together. He looked at her and saw a question. "Can I do this for her?" His voice cracked slightly, but his words were solid. "If you feel ready," he said, "then go show them." She nodded. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't overconfident. She was steady. Just like her mother had been. She wasn't just carrying a rifle. She was carrying a legacy. As they approached the 300-meter range, the air grew still again. But this silence felt different. It wasn't doubt anymore. It was anticipation. Commander Murphy turned toward Penelope. "Cautious but curious. Miss Morrison," he said, "this level of shooting is serious. Sight adjustments, wind compensation, bullet drop, even small mistakes get magnified. Are you sure you're ready?" Penelope looked at him, calm and respectful. "My mom taught me how to calculate bullet drop, how to read wind flags, and how heat distortion affects trajectory. She said long-range shooting is mostly mental, discipline first, technique second." Nearby, Chief Santoro had been watching her closely. He stepped forward and added a technical question meant to test more than just memory. "What do you know about ammunition types? Specifically their effect on performance?" Penelope didn't blink. Match-grade rounds are more consistent than standard military ball ammo. Heavier bullets resist wind drift better, but you have to raise your elevation to compensate for the drop. Lighter rounds are faster, but more easily pushed by side wind. Santoro raised his eyebrows. She didn't just answer, she explained. Lieutenant West exchanged a look with Murphy. That kind of response didn't come from watching videos or playing games. It came from real teaching. Serious, methodical, and focused. Captain Foster returned from prepping the platform. "The 300-meter range is ready. We've got a bolt-action rifle with variable zoom scope, a rest, and full wind monitoring equipment set." Penelope nodded. Once, eyes narrowing slightly as she took it all in. She was not intimidated. She was processing. As they moved toward the platform, Master Chief Cross walked beside her. The moment felt quiet, but full of weight. "Did my mom ever talk about teaching me beyond the basics?" Penelope asked softly. "All the time," Cross said, her usual sternness giving way to a quiet smile. "She said you had a natural gift, but she was even more focused on making sure you understood the responsibility that came with it." Penelope nodded slowly. That sounded just like her. She said a perfect shot doesn't mean anything if it's used for the wrong reason. Dr. Pierce, listening nearby, made a note. That mindset, ethics over ego, was rare, especially in someone so young. It told him Nicole hadn't just trained a marksman. She'd raised someone with judgment. The range ahead stretched across a dip in the land. Flags stood tall, showing the shifting breeze. Targets were marked clearly. The gear was set with precision. This wasn't a backyard challenge. It was real. Colonel Vaughn stood back, watching all the preparation with discomfort. This was supposed to be a joke, a lesson in limits, not an actual evaluation. But now there were observers, officers, even command level scrutiny. This demonstration, he said loudly to the group, is to remind everyone why real military training matters. Complex skills can't be passed on casually, even by relatives. Let's keep that in mind. He was trying to reclaim control, but fewer people were listening now. Lieutenant West had finished setting up the scope and bolted the rifle in place. He adjusted the eye relief, then turned to Penelope. This rifle's different from the one you used earlier. Trigger brake is lighter. Scope has adjustable parallax. Take a few minutes to get used to it. Penelope stepped up to the rifle and did exactly that. No rush. No show. She adjusted her cheek weld, measured her grip, adjusted the zoom slowly, studied the turrets and checked their markings. She didn't treat the weapon like it was magical. She treated it like a tool, one she respected deeply. Foster watched her and nodded. She's not reacting, he said to Murphy. She's thinking. Murphy didn't say anything. He just watched. So did everyone else. Because for the first time, it felt like they weren't about to watch a little girl fire a long-range rifle. They were about to watch a Morrison fire one. Some soldiers trained for years to learn this. She was 12 and already teaching the room. Penelope studied the bolt-action rifle on the platform. It wasn't her usual setup, but she didn't hesitate. She tested the bolt operation, checked the chamber, confirmed the scope's zero. All with calm precision. The scope's set for 200 meters, she noted, adjusting the dial carefully. I'll need to compensate for another 100, plus correct for the 5-mile-per-hour left-to-right wind. Her words weren't just accurate, they were methodical. She was thinking like a trained marksman, not guessing like a child. Officers standing nearby exchanged glances. This wasn't mimicry. It was understanding. As Penelope settled behind the rifle, the entire range went quiet. Everyone, from enlisted to command staff, watched with a strange mix of skepticism and growing respect. The 300-meter target appeared small through the scope. The sun was rising higher now, creating a shimmer of heat waves near the ground. That optical distortion, called mirage, could throw off even expert shooters. Most civilians wouldn't even notice. Penelope noticed, and she adjusted. Downrange, the flags fluttered from the southwest. She read the wind like it was part of the terrain, not an obstacle, but a factor to solve. Major Donna Wright arrived at the scene just as Penelope was adjusting her elevation. She had heard chatter over the base radio about a civilian performing live fire at 300 meters. That alone was enough to raise a red flag. She stepped onto the range, arms folded. "Captain Foster," she said, "I understand something unusual is going on." Foster approached her with calm professionalism. "Yes, ma'am. This is a supervised demonstration. Full safety protocols. We're evaluating Miss Morrison's marksmanship by request." Wright scanned the crowd. Senior officers, enlisted, a Navy psychologist, Cross, Murphy. It wasn't a sideshow anymore. It was an event. How exceptional is this performance exactly? She asked Doc before anyone could sugarcoat it. Lieutenant West replied plainly, "Mom, She fired 5 rounds at 25 meters. 1-inch group. Iron sights. Clean fundamentals. Right blinked. That level of precision was rare, even among Navy shooters. She looked toward the girl behind the scope. The stance, the grip, the calm. This wasn't casual. This was deliberate. As the officers talked, Penelope kept working. She didn't interrupt. She just scanned the terrain, rechecked her settings, and calculated the impact of heat distortion. Her lips moved slightly as she spoke to herself. 5 miles per hour, steady. Target zone rising slightly. Thermal. Mirage might push the shot high. Master Chief Cross crouched beside her. You see the shimmer? Yes, ma'am. Mirage is strong near the target. Should I add elevation or wait for it to settle? Cross smiled faintly. What does your training tell you? Penelope didn't hesitate. When thermal waves rise, the bullet path lifts. Mom said in those cases, reduce elevation by half a minute, less than normal. Don't fight the air. Ride it. Commander Murphy, standing behind them, slowly shook his head, not in disbelief, but admiration. That's graduate-level ballistics, he said. Where did she learn that? Penelope glanced up, voice soft. My mom said if you understand the science, the shooting becomes predictable. She made me study it before I could even hold a scope. Dr. Pierce was already scribbling notes. Confidence under pressure. Complex. Problem solving. Emotional control. This wasn't normal behavior for a 12-year-old. This was something else entirely. It wasn't silence after the shot. It was disbelief, gasping for breath. Penelope took her final breath before squeezing the trigger. The platform was still. Her cheek stayed tight against the rifle stock, and her finger moved like a whisper. Not a jerk. The shot cracked, but it wasn't the noise that shocked them. It was the result. Dead center. Bullseye, Chief Santoro said, peering through the spotting scope. His voice cracked slightly, not from volume, but from disbelief. Officers around him lifted binoculars. They had to see it for themselves. There, at 300 meters, the round had landed almost perfectly where the crosshairs would have met. No drift, no visible wobble. Just perfect. Major Donna Wright leaned forward, her knuckles whitening on her binoculars. That's not possible, she whispered. Colonel Vaughn stepped closer, scanning the monitors and shaking his head. There must be a mistake, he said loudly. That can't be her shot. Maybe the target was misaligned. Maybe the marker's off. Lieutenant West looked up from his clipboard calmly. Colonel, target placement was verified. All equipment is calibrated. We had 3 spotters and video coverage. That shot is confirmed. Vaughn's mouth opened, but no words came. This wasn't theory anymore. This was real. Commander Murphy took a slow breath. Then he stepped forward and addressed Penelope directly. One shot, no matter how clean, doesn't prove consistency. Would you be willing to fire a full group, 5 rounds, so we can measure total spread? Penelope nodded with the kind of calm that had become her trademark. How tight should the grouping be to meet your standards? She asked. Murphy blinked. The way she flipped the question, not challenging him, but asking with confidence, caught him off guard. Standard. Precision string, he said finally. 5 rounds. Documented wind, sight conditions. Group size will be measured. Understood, Penelope replied, already adjusting the bolt and loading. The next round, she didn't ask for a break. She didn't stretch or talk. She just returned to the scope and prepared. Her breathing was steady. The rifle became an extension of her body. Each trigger pull came after a deliberate pause, controlled breathing, smooth pressure, calculated release. 5 shots, all within seconds of each other. No dramatic gestures. No commentary. Just the quiet rhythm of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. When the final shot echoed off the ridge, Chief Santoro walked downrange to confirm in person. Even through his scope, he couldn't fully believe what he was seeing. When he returned minutes later, his expression said everything. 5 rounds fired, he said clearly. Total group size approximately 1.5 inches, at 300 meters. He paused. That exceeds advanced sniper qualification standards. The weight of those words pulled the air from the crowd. Even seasoned shooters had never seen that kind of grouping. Not in person. Not from a 12-year-old civilian. Colonel. Vaughn stepped back, visibly shaken. What started as mockery had become a moment he could no longer control. Master Chief Cross folded her arms, voice low. Nicole would have cried if she saw this, she said. But not because she'd be surprised. Penelope stood from the bench and backed away from the rifle. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just whispered, "Thanks, Mom." She came to honor her mother. But what she did shook the whole system. Even after the final shot, the silence around Penelope held strong. But this time, it wasn't awkward or skeptical. It was awe. People weren't sure how to process what they had just seen. A 12-year-old girl out shooting standards meant for elite personnel. This wasn't about making her mother proud anymore. It had become something bigger. Major Wright stood with her arms crossed, not to challenge Penelope, but to shield herself from the realization that years of assumptions about age, training, and talent had just been overturned. "Chief Santoro," she said, still staring downrange. "Are you absolutely certain about those measurements?" "Yes, ma'am," Santoro answered. "Verified by 3 observers, calibrated equipment, and visual confirmation. The performance meets and exceeds advanced precision standards." Colonel Vaughn gripped his binoculars like a lifeline. His face was pale. Everything he'd said earlier about children playing soldier now rang hollow. He had lost control of the narrative, and worse, he had been proven wrong in public. Dr. Pierce stepped forward with his notes, emotionally steady throughout, no sign of elevated stress. In fact, her responses became more focused under pressure. That's rare, even among active combat personnel. He turned to Penelope. "Miss Morrison," he said kindly. "You've shown impressive technical skills. But how do you stay calm under this kind of pressure?" Penelope smiled softly as she made her rifle safe. "My mom told me shooting is like meditation. If you focus on the process, not the outcome, the pressure goes away. Just you and the shot." The room paused. That answer wasn't rehearsed. It was real. Dr. Pierce nodded slowly. "That's a remarkable mindset for someone your age. It speaks to deep maturity." Cross approached next, emotion flickering across her otherwise strong face. "Outstanding work, Miss Morrison. Your mother would be overwhelmed with pride right now." Before Penelope could respond, the air changed. A distant thumping grew louder, the unmistakable sound of helicopter rotors. Dust stirred around the range as radios crackled to life. "Unscheduled inbound aircraft," Captain Foster said, checking his earpiece. "Pentagon clearance codes. Top priority." The message dropped like a weight across the field. Nobody had called Washington. That meant word of Penelope's demonstration had traveled fast, and high. Colonel Vaughn's heart sank. He watched the sky anxiously, already picturing how this would look in official reports. He had tried to humiliate a child on government grounds, and now the Pentagon had shown up. As the helicopter descended onto the base landing zone, a massive gust of wind blew across the field, kicking up dust and loose debris. The message was clear. This wasn't local anymore. It was national. When the aircraft finally touched down, the side door opened, and out stepped Admiral Carolyn Wells. Her walk was sharp and silent. Her silver hair moved slightly in the rotorwash. But nothing else about her wavered. Admiral Wells didn't need to speak to command a room. Her presence alone did that. At 64 years old, she was a decorated veteran, a battle-hardened strategist, and one of the few people who could make a SEAL team go silent just by entering the room. Her reputation wasn't for speeches. It was for decisions. Major Wright was the first to greet her. "Admiral Wells," she said with formal crispness. "Welcome to Naval Station Coronado. We weren't informed of your arrival." Wells gave her a look that sliced past the words. "I received direct footage of a demonstration," she said. "No official channels. No paperwork. Just a performance." So precise it interrupted a Pentagon briefing. Her eyes swept across the assembled officers. "Where's the shooter?" Everyone turned. Penelope was still by the bench, surrounded by gear she had cleaned and repacked. She didn't stand at attention. She didn't panic. She just looked up, calm, quiet, ready. Admiral Wells studied her for a long second, and then slowly walked her way. The Pentagon didn't come to ask questions. It came to witness a phenomenon. Admiral Carolyn Wells stepped out of the staff vehicle, her posture stiff, her eyes sharp. She surveyed the range like she'd just stepped onto a battlefield. No greetings. No smiles. Just full assessment. The moment her boots touched the ground, the atmosphere changed completely. She wasn't there to observe politely. She was there to understand what made a 12-year-old civilian outperform trained shooters, and to determine what the Navy would do about it. Major Wright met her halfway. "Ma'am," she began, standing straight. "We received no prior notification of your arrival." Admiral Wells didn't slow her stride. "I wasn't looking for ceremony, Major. I came because I received direct footage, not reports, not summaries, of marksmanship here that demands my attention." The words carried weight. Everyone knew what it meant for someone at her level to bypass chains of command. This wasn't a performance review. It was a potential policy shift. "Where's the individual responsible for the shooting?" she asked. Wright gestured toward the range. "Miss Penelope Morrison, ma'am. Aged 12. Daughter of retired SEAL Kevin Morrison and the late Lieutenant Nicole Morrison." At the sound of that name, Admiral Wells paused. "Morrison," she repeated, eyes narrowing. "Nicole Morrison's daughter?" The air tightened. Wells clearly knew the name. And more than that, she cared. Wright nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Nicole was KI 3 years ago. Penelope's performance has drawn significant attention this morning." Wells nodded slightly and turned toward the range. "I want to see her for myself. No announcements. No stage setting. I want to observe her naturally." Wright signaled for a vehicle, but Wells shook her head. "We'll walk. I prefer to enter unannounced." No one adjusts their behavior when they don't know they're being watched. Colonel Vaughn, still lingering near the edge of the group, felt sweat collect at his collar. He realized now that every word he'd said, every decision made that morning, especially his resistance, might be reviewed under a microscope. Meanwhile, Penelope had just finished cleaning her rifle when she noticed the shift around her. Everyone had suddenly straightened their backs. Voices dropped. Movements slowed. Something was coming. "Dad," she whispered, stepping close to Kevin. "Why is everyone acting weird?" Kevin glanced toward the vehicles, now pulling up beside the range. He knew. He recognized the body language, the posture of command, the ripple effect of rank. He crouched beside her. "Someone important's here. Just remember what Mom used to say. Speak clearly, stay respectful, and don't let the stars on someone's shoulders scare you. Truth always speaks better than fear." Penelope nodded, gripping her cleaning cloth a little tighter. When Admiral Wells stepped onto the range, her eyes went straight to the shooting bench. She saw the rifle, the tools, the notepad, and then Penelope, a girl, composed, still, observing her without shrinking. Wells didn't need an introduction. She just knew. Commander Murphy stepped forward to give context. Admiral, I'm Commander Murphy, SEAL Team 7. We've supervised Miss Morrison's demonstration under full safety protocols. Wells didn't interrupt, but her face made it clear she expected more than flattery. Explain the performance, she said. Murphy nodded. Double quotes. She achieved 1.5-inch groupings at 300 meters. That exceeds sniper qualification metrics. She's used proper safety, procedure, environmental calculation, and demonstrates technique beyond standard recruit level. Wells processed it. No reaction on her face, but her silence meant she believed it. And where is Miss Morrison now? Penelope stepped forward before anyone could call her name. Right here, ma'am, she said, standing tall but not defiant. Her voice was steady. Her hands still held traces of cleaning oil, but she wiped them discreetly before speaking again. I'm Penelope Morrison. Admiral Wells looked at her, really looked. The girl's posture, her calm, the shape of her face. She saw traces of Nicole Morrison there, and something more, something she couldn't quite name, but knew would matter. Asterisk, some kids get scholarships. Others get scouted. But only one got flagged by the Pentagon before her 13th birthday. Admiral. Wells studied Penelope not like a child, but like a potential asset, one discovered in the most unlikely way. There was no medal to hand over, no ribbon to tie. But something more serious was unfolding. The Admiral's expression softened slightly, but her voice stayed crisp. Miss Morrison, she said with rare gentleness, I understand you've been honoring your mother's memory through marksmanship training. Your performance today has been remarkable. Thank you, ma'am, Penelope replied with steady composure. My mom always said having skill means using it the right way. That answer landed hard. Wells had interviewed hardened soldiers who couldn't explain the weight of responsibility like that. Here stood a girl, 12 years old, speaking like someone who'd already carried it. Master Chief Cross stepped closer, recognizing what this moment meant. Admiral Wells, she said with deep respect, I served alongside Lieutenant Nicole Morrison. Her daughter hasn't just inherited her instincts. She surpassed them, with training and discipline that most adults never reach. Wells turned toward Cross, her tone thoughtful. You've seen both of them in action. How would you compare their abilities? Cross didn't hesitate. Nicole was the most naturally gifted shooter I ever saw. But Penelope isn't just natural. She's been taught to think, to evaluate, to adapt. She's combining instinct with science. That was the kind of testimony Wells valued. Not flattery. Facts. Dr. Pierce, who had been silently watching the exchange, added his evaluation. Admiral, he said, I've assessed Miss Morrison's stress levels, decision-making, and focus throughout the entire demonstration. She performs under pressure with emotional stability and maturity well above her age. Wells nodded slowly. And your recommendation? I believe she's ready for advanced development programs, Pierce replied, as long as they're balanced with proper support, education, structure, and the space to still be a child. That last part mattered. Wells had seen prodigies burned out by systems that pushed too hard, too fast. She was looking for something sustainable. Colonel Vaughn, who had kept quiet until now, stepped forward. His voice was formal, but shaky underneath. Admiral Wells, he said, I want to clarify that all range safety protocols were followed. Civilian access was approved only under supervision. While today's event was unconventional, Base Command responded appropriately. Wells turned her full gaze on him. Colonel, she said, I understand you are initially skeptical about Miss Morrison's presence on this range. The silence after that line was heavier than wind. Vaughn straightened. My concerns were based on safety and protocol, ma'am, he replied quickly. Miss Morrison's performance exceeded all expectations. But no amount of polite phrasing could cover the truth. He'd misjudged her from the start. Worse, he'd nearly shut the door on a moment that had now drawn national interest. Wells didn't press further. She didn't need to. Her measured stare said enough. This was noted, and would not be forgotten. Then, finally, she turned back to Penelope. Why? The words she spoke next weren't casual, but they carried the weight of an institution. Miss Morrison, she said, would you be interested in joining an advanced marksmanship program? One designed to develop talent like yours to its fullest potential. The question hovered in the air. Kevin, standing behind his daughter, felt the breath catch in his throat. This was more than they'd ever hoped for when they asked. To use the range. It was more than honoring Nicole's legacy. It was becoming a legacy of its own. She came to honor her mother, but she left learning her legacy ran deeper and darker than anyone told her. The sun was beginning to lower across the range, casting long shadows over the gravel and targets. But the biggest shift came not from light. It came from the quiet intensity between Penelope and Admiral Wells. Admiral Wells studied the girl's face carefully, her voice lowering. There's something about your family's service history you may not know. Something that explains why your abilities are more than just inherited talent. Penelope blinked. Kevin stiffened. I served with your mother, but I also knew her mother, Wells continued. She was one of the first women placed in covert reconnaissance teams. Her missions were so classified they didn't exist in the record. Until now. Kevin took a slow breath, his mind racing. Nicole told me her parents died in a car crash, he said, puzzled. She grew up in foster care. She believed they were gone. Wells pulled out a sealed folder. From it, she revealed a single photo, worn but clear. In it stood a woman in full Navy uniform, holding a sniper rifle with ease. Her posture, her grip, even her gaze. Penelope's eyes widened. That's her. That's my mom's face. But not exactly. Kevin leaned in. His mouth opened, but no sound came. Wells nodded. That's Margaret Morrison, Chief Warrant Officer, Navy Special Operations. Your grandmother. She was reported KIA, but only because her missions were Black Ops. She's been under deep cover for 3 decades. Penelope's hand trembled as she touched the photo. Her mind tried to catch up. My grandmother's alive? She is, Wells said gently. But she was cut off from all personal contact. Nicole never knew. It was safer that way, for both of them. Kevin sat down slowly, the truth crashing down like a wave. Nicole hadn't lied. She'd simply never known. And now, 3 generations of shooters, warriors, had been separated by duty, silence and secrecy. Penelope looked up. What happened to her? Why now? Wells looked her straight in the eyes. Because you made the whole world pay attention. You triggered an internal alert, not because you broke rules, but because your performance matched someone on a very old classified list. That's what brought me here. That's what brought this photo out of a locked vault. Kevin looked at the Admiral, his voice hoarse. Why tell us this now? Wells paused. Because you deserve the truth. And because the institution that kept this secret now owes you, both of you, more than silence. Penelope stared at the picture, not just at the uniform, not at the hands, the stance, the way the woman held the rifle, not like a tool, but like a promise. Asterisk, she grew up thinking strength came from discipline. Today, she learned it also came from sacrifice. Admiral Wells didn't soften her tone, but her words took on weight that went beyond protocol. Penelope, she said carefully, your grandmother, Chief Margaret Morrison, is currently stationed at the Pentagon. When news of your marksmanship came through our channels this morning, she was the one assigned to investigate. Kevin blinked. Wait. Are you saying? He began, but his voice trailed off under the weight of it all. Yes, Wells replied. The demonstration that brought me here also activated her clearance to monitor emerging talent. Your daughter's name, her precision, triggered something personal. Penelope stayed still. The picture of her grandmother was still in her hand, her eyes locked on it. Does she know about me? I mean, really know? Wells nodded slowly. She knows everything. She's been following you since the day you were born. Quietly, carefully. At a distance, Kevin sat down, stunned. All the quiet help they'd received over the years, housing assistance, tuition grants, support that always came just in time, suddenly made sense that it hadn't been the system helping them, not it. Had been someone watching from behind the system. Penelope's voice was barely above a whisper. She was at Mom's funeral? Wells didn't answer right away. Then she said quietly, yes, in uniform. At a distance, unidentified. She watched from the far edge of the crowd. Security protocols wouldn't let her say anything. That image landed like a wave. A soldier. A grandmother. Standing alone in a sea of grief, watching the burial of her only daughter. Unable to hold the hand of the granddaughter left behind. Penelope closed her eyes, the weight of that moment settling into her chest. I don't know whether to feel angry or grateful, she said honestly. That's normal, Wells replied gently. The military asks some of us to give up more than we ever thought we could, sometimes even family. Dr. Pierce had been watching Penelope's face closely. There were no signs of distress, no breakdown. Only silent, measured processing. He made a note. Exceptional emotional regulation. Elevated cognitive framing. Wells turned toward Kevin. Double quotes Mr. Morrison. I want to be clear. Everything your family has endured, the silence, the invisible support, the watchful presence, was done with love. But also with duty. Margaret didn't walk away. She was kept away. And now that line might shift. Kevin nodded. Slowly, still overwhelmed. She wants to meet her, he said quietly. After everything, she has to. Penelope looked up with quiet strength. Can I? Meet her, I mean. Is that allowed now? Wells gave the smallest smile. For most of her career, it wouldn't have been. But your public performance changed everything. It created an institutional justification to initiate contact. Kevin blinked. So you're saying she can meet her grandmother because she's too talented to ignore? Wells didn't flinch. I'm saying this. What was once hidden for protection can now be revealed, because your daughter forced the world to pay attention. She had imagined this moment in dreams she didn't know were real. Now the woman from those dreams stood just feet away. The helicopter's descent shook the earth lightly beneath their feet. Its thundering blades stirred the dust, but what? It stirred far more. Secrets, regrets, and decades of waiting. As the rotors slowed and the hatch opened, Penelope held her breath. She saw the boots first, then the posture, then the face, familiar, and yet not. Chief Warrant Officer. Margaret Morrison stepped onto the tarmac with the kind of stillness that came from living a life in shadows. Every movement she made was calm, efficient, deliberate, but the moment her eyes met Penelope's, that military discipline cracked just enough to reveal something deeper, something tender. She stopped walking for a second, just stood there, looking at the girl who carried the face of her daughter and the fire of her legacy. Penelope couldn't move. Her fingers curled tightly at her side. It was like seeing her mother in a mirror, aged forward, but colder, stronger, etched by sacrifice. Kevin took a half step forward, but then stopped. This wasn't his moment to shape Dot. It belonged to them. Margaret moved again. Slowly now, one step at a time. Her boots made no sound, but her presence was thunder. When she reached them, she removed her cap, something no protocol required, and looked directly into her granddaughter's eyes. "You look just like Nicole," she said softly, her voice scratchy from emotion long suppressed. "But you have your grandfather's eyes." Penelope didn't speak. Right away, she just stared Dot at the insignia, the uniform, the silver hair, and the weight of 3 decades behind every thread on her grandmother's shoulders. "I thought you were dead," Penelope finally whispered. "We all did," Kevin added, his voice thick. Margaret nodded slowly. "That was the official story. For your safety. For hers. For mine." A long pause hung in the air, heavy with everything unsaid. Penelope looked down. "Did you ever try to find us?" Margaret's face softened, and then collapsed, just for a moment, into something raw. "Every year, every birthday. I had a file thicker than most mission dossiers. But orders are orders, and mine said silence." Admiral Wells stepped back, giving the moment space. This wasn't a briefing anymore. It was a reckoning between bloodlines. Dr. Pierce stood nearby, as well, quietly observing the interaction for emotional stability. But he too had gone still, caught in the humanity of it all. Margaret reached out. Slowly, she didn't go for a hug. She simply offered her hand, like a soldier would to an equal. Penelope looked at it, then, slowly, took it. And in that single touch, the dam broke. They didn't sob. They didn't collapse. They just stood there, connected. 2 generations of warriors finally allowed to know each other. "I couldn't be there when your mom died," Margaret said quietly. "But I saw her grow through you. Every skill, every decision. It's like watching her stand up again." Penelope nodded, trying to blink back tears. "I don't even know what to call you," she said. Margaret gave the smallest, saddest smile. "Whatever feels right." "Grandma," Penelope whispered, the word trembling out of her. Then louder, firmer. "Grandma." Asterisk, she didn't just reunite with her past. She confronted a future that could change everything. Margaret Morrison stood quietly in front of her granddaughter, still wearing the expression of someone trained to show strength before emotion. But now, her eyes softened with guilt and pride. "Stayed away to protect you," she said gently. "Not because I didn't want to be part of your life, but because being near you would have made you a target." Penelope looked down for a moment. "I get it," she said, her voice low. "But it still hurt." Kevin stepped forward, his words tight. "She needed family, Margaret. After Nicole died, she needed someone. And we both thought there was. No one left." Margaret nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of his words. "I watched from a distance," she said. "Every milestone, every report. I saw how strong she was becoming. But I couldn't risk contact. My assignments weren't just secret. They were dangerous. Anyone who knew me was vulnerable." Admiral Wells stepped between them slightly, easing the tension with context. Chief Morrison's work in counterintelligence meant even her existence had to be hidden. The protocols that separated her from family were about safety, not neglect. Penelope listened closely. She had always believed she was just a girl with a rifle and a mission to honor her mom. Now she was realizing she was something much larger. The product of 3 generations of warriors, all carrying burdens shaped by silence. She took a breath. "Grandma, did you know about my shooting?" Margaret's lips curved into a faint smile. "I've seen every range report, every test, every video clip that came through the system. I've known since you were 9 that you were special." Penelope's throat tightened. That was both comforting and strange. To be monitored from afar. To be watched like a subject, but also protected like family. Lieutenant West stepped forward, intrigued. Chief Morrison. This morning Miss Morrison achieved 1.5 inch. Groupings at 300 meters. Is that consistent with family ability? Margaret turned to him, half amused. That level of precision is beyond what we expect in even seasoned shooters. But yes, spatial awareness, coordination, and control run strong in our family. What matters more, though, is that she's been trained in fundamentals. Skill without discipline fades. She has both. Dr. Pierce checked his readings and cleared his throat. Admiral, Chief Morrison, Miss Morrison has maintained remarkably stable stress levels throughout these revelations, even in moments of emotional weight. Do you believe this kind of mental resilience is hereditary? Margaret responded with clarity. Our family teaches discipline early. Emotional control is not just a trait, it's a value. It's why precision shooting fits us so well. It's not about pulling a trigger. It's about mastering your body under pressure. Commander Murphy now joined the conversation, nodding respectfully at Margaret. Chief Morrison, given what we've all seen today, what's your assessment of Penelope's readiness for advanced training? Margaret looked at her granddaughter carefully, not as a proud grandmother, but as a soldier assessing a recruit. She has the skills, the instincts, and the control. But she's still young. Any program we consider should balance development with the need for a full life, education, growth, friendship. She's not just a weapon, she's a person. That line hit hard. It wasn't just about what Penelope could do. It was about who she could become, if the institution allowed her to grow as more than just talent. Chief Santoro, who had been quietly analyzing from a broader view, added a final thought. If talent like this runs in families, it could change how we identify and train future marksmen. We may be looking at the beginning of a whole new model. Everyone fell quiet, not because the conversation was over, but because they realized they were standing at the start of something bigger. And one girl's story, asterisk. She didn't ask for their attention, but now they were building policies with her in mind. Inside the command center, conversation shifted from awe to structure. What had started as a demonstration was now clearly a career-defining moment. Not just for Penelope, but for everyone around her. Chief Margaret Morrison stood quietly as military brass gathered around her. The tone had changed. It wasn't about proving Penelope's talent anymore. It was about deciding what the system would do about it. Colonel Vaughn lingered near the edge of the group, visibly aware that his earlier stance now looked short-sighted. His voice was low when he spoke. Chief Morrison, he said carefully, I want to acknowledge that my initial judgment about Miss Morrison's capabilities was based on limited knowledge. Margaret's reply was direct, not aggressive, but firm. Colonel, her abilities aren't the result of family favors. They're the result of discipline, training, and talent. Her performance stands on its own, regardless of her name. Her response made it clear. This was not about bloodlines or connections. That it was about merit. Before the tension could deepen, the doors opened again. Another arrival, this time carrying weight at the national level. General Nancy Coleman. The room straightened instantly. Her steps were purposeful, her expression unreadable. Chief Morrison, she said with a respectful nod. I've been briefed on today's events. Miss Morrison's performance has reached several Pentagon channels. And what we've seen aligns perfectly with the kind of talent our specialized development programs are built to support. Penelope looked up, stunned. She had no idea this many powerful people even knew her name, let alone wanted to shape her future. Margaret kept her eyes steady. General, she said, I want to be clear. Penelope's development must consider her age, her education, and her emotional growth. Talent doesn't justify rushing a child into adult systems. Coleman nodded in agreement. We've adapted, Chief. Our most effective training tracks combine high-level skill development with psychological and social stability. Miss Morrison would be guided by mentorship, not acceleration. The words, career planning, surfaced during the conversation. It didn't sound like an offer. It sounded like a blueprint. Penelope listened closely. Part of her felt overwhelmed. But another part, the part her mother and grandmother had molded, stood calmly in the current outside. As sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting a golden light across the range. Dust floated in the stillness, mixing with the quiet. Intensity inside the control building. Penelope glanced down at the silver trident charm around her neck. It caught the light for a second, a quiet reflection of her mother's legacy, now shared with a grandmother she'd just met. She wasn't alone in this anymore. Margaret noticed her staring at it. Penelope, she said softly, your mom wore that symbol not for what it gave her, but for what she gave others. Service, precision, responsibility. Penelope nodded. I know. Her voice didn't waver. General Coleman watched her with the scrutiny of someone who'd interviewed hundreds of candidates over decades. But Penelope wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was just standing in her truth. Inside the briefing room, Captain Foster laid out shot grouping data across the conference table. Target diagrams, photographs, wind data, timestamps, all perfectly logged. This is what brought us here, he said. 5 shots, 300 meters, 1.5 inches. No instability. No corrections midstring. Full environmental rid. Coleman picked up one of the sheets and held it up to the light. This level of performance isn't just exceptional, she said. It's historic. She turned to Margaret. And it's going to be the foundation for how we handle advanced civilian evaluations going forward. The room fell into a contemplative silence. Penelope had thought she was here to prove something. She had. But now, the system was rewriting its rules. Because of her asterisk, what began as a single shot ended with a door opening to a future built for. Legends. The room grew quiet as General Coleman reviewed every documented detail of Penelope's demonstration. 2 shooting sessions, one at 25 meters with iron sights, and one at 300 meters with variable optics. Both showed flawless precision. She looked over the photographs of the targets and nodded slowly. This isn't luck, she said. This is foundational skill, stable across distances, across gear. Commander Murphy confirmed it. Yes, ma'am. Chief Santoro, Lieutenant West, and I verified everything independently with calibrated tools. Her grouping is legitimate and matches advanced marksmanship records. Margaret Morrison held the same sheets of paper in her hand, but focused on a different concern. As a soldier and as Penelope's grandmother, she saw both the opportunity and the potential burden. General, Margaret began carefully, I want to make this clear. Penelope's performance is extraordinary, but she's 12. If we move too fast, we could damage more than we build. Dr. Pierce, still monitoring Penelope's emotional responses, nodded in agreement. She's handled today incredibly. Well, he said, but she's still forming her identity. We need a full psychological evaluation before pushing anything intensive. Maturity develops with time, even in prodigies. Coleman didn't argue. We've learned from the past. She said, the goal isn't acceleration, it's mentorship. Guided training scheduled around a normal academic life. No full-time commitments, no military enrollment. Just structured weekends, summer courses, and guided growth. Kevin finally stepped in. He had listened long enough, and though proud, he remained protective. General, he said with a calm but firm tone, this is still my daughter. She's a child. Her schooling, her friendships, her life, they all matter. I don't want her turned into a soldier before she's even a teenager. Coleman nodded, her voice respectful. You're absolutely right. And any program we offer will be optional, supportive, and flexible. We're offering enrichment, not enlistment. That helped. Kevin's shoulders eased slightly, though his eyes stayed watchful. Penelope, quiet through all of it, had taken everything in. Her hands stayed folded in her lap. Her eyes, however, were focused. She understood what this meant. She had stepped into something bigger than herself, but not blindly. General Coleman, she said suddenly, breaking the silence. All eyes turned to her. I'd like to accept the offer. I want to honor my mom, and now my grandma, by growing into what they were, what they stood for. Her voice was steady, not excited, not childish, just clear. Everyone in the room paused. This wasn't a kid chasing a dream. This was a young person making a decision with full awareness of what came next. Dr. Pierce smiled, noting the resolve in her posture. Admiral Wells stepped forward next, a tablet in her hand with formal documentation. Miss Morrison, she said with authority, the Navy is prepared to offer you a spot in our elite youth marksmanship initiative. This comes with guidance from senior instructors, special access to facilities, and a protective protocol for your identity and safety. Your regular education will continue without interruption. Penelope nodded, double quotes. Thank you, ma'am. Wells handed the tablet to Kevin. Ensuring parental approval remained part of the process. Kevin read it slowly, then signed. His hand didn't shake. Margaret looked on, her eyes shimmering. And then, for the first time in years, maybe ever 3, generations of Morrison stood in the same room, linked by a gift and a choice. She didn't just impress the military. She made the system bend to protect her future. Inside the conference room, the tone shifted from awe to action. High-ranking officials were no longer reacting to Penelope Morrison's performance. They were planning around it. Master Chief Cross stepped forward first, setting down a folder on the table. General, she said, based on Penelope's performance and her mother's legacy, I've drafted preliminary training recommendations. Nothing accelerated, just structured exposure to more advanced techniques over time. General Coleman nodded, listening carefully. What kind of instruction do you propose? Ma'am, Cross replied, Miss Morrison has the foundation. Most adults don't develop until their 2nd or 3rd year of training. But to grow safely, she needs access to gear and guidance she won't find in civilian environments. Slow and steady, mentorship-based. The room took it seriously. They weren't trying to make her a soldier tomorrow. They were building something sustainable. Lieutenant West stepped in with logistical data. Civilian involvement will require updated access protocols for equipment, scheduling flexibility around school, and structured supervision. It's doable, but it must be managed tightly. Coleman nodded, clearly weighing how this might become a pilot program for other gifted youth in the future. Chief Santoro spoke next. We'd recommend milestone assessments, clear markers of progress, so we can track her abilities without pushing her too hard. If she's ready, we'll know. If not, the structure protects her from burnout. Even Colonel Vaughn, who had been mostly quiet since his early missteps, stepped forward. General Coleman, he said with effort, Naval Station Coronado is ready to fully support any program that aids Miss Morrison's growth. I misjudged her potential. But that won't happen again. It was his attempt at redemption. And this time, he meant it. Before Coleman could respond, a new interruption shifted the room. Captain Sandra Moore from Media Relations entered. Briskly, concern plain on her face. Admiral, she said, we're receiving press inquiries. Journalists are asking about unusual activity on base today involving a civilian. They want interviews, footage, names. That snapped everyone's focus back to security. Admiral Wells stood tall. Captain Moore, she said with finality, All media requests are to be routed directly to Pentagon Public Affairs. Nothing is to be released without clearance. Miss Morrison's identity, family background, and training activities fall under restricted disclosure. Everyone understood what that meant. Penelope wasn't just special anymore. She was a potential security asset. And Margaret Morrison's classified past couldn't be exposed further, not even for public praise. The meeting concluded soon after, with agreements in place to proceed carefully. As they stepped outside into the base courtyard, the golden light of afternoon softened the hard lines of the buildings. Penelope walked beside her grandmother, for the first time, not in secret, not in stories, but in reality. "Grandma," she said quietly, "I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're not a picture anymore." Margaret, a woman trained to suppress emotion under fire, blinked away tears she never thought she'd be allowed to show. "Penelope," she said, "being seen with you like this, walking next to you without hiding, it's something I never thought I'd get to feel." They passed a flagpole and paused, both looking at it in silence. A legacy carried in blood. A future still forming, and a nation just beginning to realize the story it was about to witness. Asterisk, asterisk, she was once a shadow in the background. Now she stood at the podium, changing how the system defines greatness. The sun set behind Naval Station Coronado, casting golden light across the base. The courtyard was filled with crisp uniforms, shining medals, and quiet anticipation. It had been 3 weeks since Penelope Morrison's demonstration reshaped everything. And today, the Navy responded, not with silence, but with celebration. For the first time in base history, a formal ceremony was being held to honor a civilian for excellence in military marksmanship. The audience included Pentagon officials, local families, and active duty members, many of whom had either witnessed or heard of the 12-year-old whose precision had stirred the highest levels of command. Penelope stood in a pressed uniform tailored just for her, not military regulation, but a formal civilian variant styled to reflect respect for her role. She stood beside Master Chief Cross, her shoulders square, her gaze steady. The insignia on her chest marked her as a junior instructor trainee, a status rarely granted, and never before to someone her age. Admiral Wells watched from the front row, seated beside Margaret Morrison, whose presence now symbolized both personal healing and institutional change. What had once been hidden under classified silence now stood in the open. General Nancy Coleman stepped to the podium, her voice clear and confident. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, scanning the crowd, "we gather not only to celebrate extraordinary talent, but to acknowledge what happens when courage, discipline, and legacy come together in one remarkable young individual." The words echoed across the base. She continued, 3 weeks ago, we witnessed a demonstration of marksmanship that challenged our understanding of how talent is discovered, nurtured, and honored. And more importantly, it reminded us that ability does not depend on age or background. In the crowd, Kevin Morrison listened with mixed feelings, fierce pride, quiet worry, and a father's hope that this recognition would not cost Penelope her chance at a normal life. Meanwhile, Colonel Vaughn stood near the back. Humbled by his earlier resistance, he had since led major reforms in how civilian talent was treated on base. His proposals on family support and youth development were now being circulated through command chains across the country. Coleman gestured toward the front. "Penelope Morrison, would you please join me?" Penelope took a breath, then walked. With a confidence she'd earned through hard weeks of training, meetings, and emotional discovery. As she passed Chief Santoro, she paused briefly. "Thank you," she said softly, "for believing in me before anyone else did." He nodded, pride shining through his usually stern face. At the podium, Coleman placed a plaque in Penelope's hands, etched with her name, the date, and the phrase precision, discipline, Legacy. Then the general turned back to the microphone. This recognition is not only for what you have done, Miss Morrison. It's for who you are and what you represent. Your achievements have changed how we think about skill, about instruction, and about the future of our forces. Penelope stood still as the crowd applauded, but inside her, something quiet and deep stirred. She wasn't chasing her mother's shadow anymore. She was walking beside it, forging her own path. She took the stage to talk about her story. But what she really gave them was a blueprint for change. The courtyard had gone quiet. Penelope stepped up to the microphone, the plaque still tucked under her arm, and glanced out at the rows of decorated officers, soldiers, trainees, and kids who had come just to see the girl whose name now echoed through military halls. Her voice rang out, calm and clear. When I asked to use precision point range 3 weeks ago, I just wanted to honor my mom on the anniversary of her death. A hush spread over the crowd. I didn't expect to meet a part of my family I didn't know existed. I didn't expect generals or programs or ceremonies. I just wanted to do what she taught me. Aim steady, breathe right, and always shoot with purpose. Margaret Morrison's eyes welled with quiet tears. Kevin stood beside her, a hand gently resting over his heart. Penelope continued, "My mother told me that when you have an unusual gift, it's not just for you. It's meant to be shared, to help others get better too." She looked around. "That's what I've learned here. My instructors didn't just help me shoot better. They helped me speak better, think better, lead better." She turned to Admiral Wells, who gave a small, proud nod. "Master Chief Cross, Commander Murphy, Dr. Pierce, all of you helped me understand that being good at something isn't the finish line. It's the start of a responsibility." Across the courtyard, Commander Murphy smiled slightly. He had seen many young officers take the stand, but never someone like her. Penelope inhaled deeply. "And that's why I'm proud to announce that, starting this fall, Naval Station Coronado will be launching a new civilian marksmanship development program, built from everything we learned these last few weeks." There were surprised murmurs in the audience. This was more than just a personal win. It was systemic evolution. She went on. "This program won't just look for kids who fit a mold. It'll find kids who break it. And then it'll help them shape their skills without losing the rest of who they are, their school, their families, their joy." Chief Santoro and Lieutenant West nodded from the side, visibly moved. This wasn't just a speech. It was a mission. In the front row, Margaret Morrison whispered to Kevin. "She's doing more than following in Nicole's footsteps," she said. "She's lighting her own path." Kevin's eyes didn't leave his daughter. "I've never been more proud and more certain. This is exactly where she belongs." After Penelope finished speaking, certificates were handed out, formal ranks documented, and the youngest civilian instructor in Navy history was now official. The ceremony concluded with a live shooting demonstration. Penelope loaded her rifle, adjusted her scope, and calmly hit targets at ranges that made even seasoned marksmen whistle under their breath. Corporal Reed nudged Sergeant Hayes. 3 weeks ago, Vaughn said she didn't belong, Reed whispered. Now he's rewriting base protocols because of her. Hayes nodded. Sometimes it takes a 12-year-old to show us where we're falling short. The crowd didn't cheer wildly. They stood in quiet respect, because everyone understood they weren't just witnessing talent. They were witnessing legacy, reborn and rebuilt, one steady breath at a time. Asterisk, she came to honor one legacy. She ended up redefining an entire system. As the ceremony came to a close, and the crowd dispersed across Naval Station Coronado, the energy in the air didn't settle. Something had shifted, not just for Penelope, but for the culture of the base itself. She walked alongside her grandmother and father, her steps confident. What began as a tribute to her mother's memory had grown into something much larger. Her skill had earned recognition not just from admirals, but from entire departments. Her story had inspired change, and now it was time to see how far that change could reach. The sun dipped low over the Pacific, and the ocean breeze whispered softly through the courtyard. It carried the sound of waves crashing against the shore, the same waves that had echoed through her mother's footsteps years before. Penelope wasn't just the girl who had shocked a military range anymore. She was now a junior range instructor, a policy influencer, and a name being spoken in places her mother had once only dreamed of entering. Margaret Morrison looked at her granddaughter with deep pride, not just for the shooting skills or the recognition, but for the character that had formed under pressure. Penelope hadn't broken. She had risen, with discipline, with grace, with purpose. 6 months later, Penelope returned to Precision Point range, this time not for a personal mission, but for an international one. An elite global marksmanship competition was being hosted at the base. The world's best had gathered, special forces from allied nations, top civilian sharpshooters, and tactical instructors from 5 continents. The station had never seen anything like it. What had begun as a child's quiet request to borrow a range had now elevated the entire installation's prestige. Penelope was no longer a student. She now served as Junior Range Safety Officer, a title she had earned through months of technical training, tactical observation, and safety certifications. And people noticed. She wasn't the curiosity anymore. She was a standard. Captain Foster approached her with a gleam of pride. "Miss Morrison, the German team asked if they could observe your warm-up routine. Word is spreading." Penelope smiled. "I'd be honored. My mother believed sharing technique helps everyone grow." It wasn't about fame. It was about legacy, the right kind. The kind that helped others rise. Nearby, Master Chief Cross coordinated sessions with visiting units, translating Penelope's methods into tactical conversations. "The British SAS wants to learn about your wind adjustment math," she told Penelope. "They said your approach to real-time drift correction is more reliable than some digital systems." Penelope nodded, calm as ever. "I'll break it down during the 3 p.m. session. If it helps their shooters, it helps the mission." Admiral Wells arrived mid-morning, quietly observing from a shaded control station. She'd seen many reforms come and go, but none had been sparked by someone so young or so steady. She walked up beside Penelope during a break. "Miss Morrison," she said, "you've exceeded every projection we had. What began as a one-day exception has become the template for a new kind of training." Penelope didn't respond with ego. She responded with focus. "Just want to make sure what my mother taught me keeps helping others." Wells nodded. "It already is. And it will, across bases, borders, and generations." She came as her mother's daughter. She left with an award named after the very woman who taught her to aim with purpose. As the International Training Summit came to a close, a wave of respect followed Penelope wherever she moved. Delegates from across the world had seen what she could do, not just behind the scope of a rifle, but within the structure of a system that had learned to listen. General Coleman stood at the head of the final ceremony with a host of dignitaries, including military attaches from across Europe, Asia, and South America. They weren't just there to shake hands. They were taking notes, studying how the United States had transformed raw civilian talent into disciplined excellence without stripping away identity or childhood. "Miss Morrison," Coleman explained to the group, "has proven that elite capability can emerge from anywhere. Our challenge isn't just finding talent, it's building systems that support it responsibly." In the crowd, Margaret Morrison stood quietly with Kevin, both watching Penelope move through the gathering of elite shooters with the calm presence of someone twice her age. "She's everything Nicole hoped she'd be," Margaret whispered, Kevin nodded. She's more. She's built something new from what Nicole left behind. Their family, once fractured by secrecy and duty, now stood together with a restored bond. Margaret's retirement from classified service had allowed her to step into the role she had once been denied. Grandmother, guide, protector. Dr. Pierce observed it all from a respectful distance. His long-term studies had focused on whether accelerated skill recognition could harm young minds. Penelope had flipped the hypothesis. Her emotional regulation is not just stable, he reported to his colleagues. It's strengthening. With the right support, these environments don't erode youth, they refine it. Penelope's success had become a model, one built not on pressure, but on protection and pacing. She wasn't pushed into adulthood. She was shaped with care. Kevin, too, had stepped deeper into this new chapter. He completed his instructor certification and now worked closely with range officials, providing technical insights and ensuring Penelope's journey remained grounded, that it had become a family mission, not to chase medals, but to ensure balance. The kind Nicole would have wanted. Then came the next big shift. Lieutenant West approached the family with a formal folder in hand. "Mr. Morrison," he said, "the Naval Academy has expressed preliminary interest in sponsoring Penelope's education when the time comes. Full scholarship. Custom training track." Kevin took the folder, cautious. "We're not in a rush," he said firmly. "We're still making sure she has time to be a kid. No fast-forwarding." West smiled. "Understood. No pressure. Just recognition. The door is open when she's ready." Nearby, Colonel Vaughn, once the most skeptical voice on base, stepped up quietly. He didn't have a speech prepared. "Just a simple truth. Miss Morrison," he said sincerely, "you've made us all better. We've changed our evaluations, our civilian interaction protocols, everything. You've helped raise the bar for everyone, not just for yourself." Penelope accepted the words gracefully. Sometimes, respect from a former critic carries the most weight. As the awards ceremony began, the entire field grew quiet. Admiral Wells took the stage and addressed the global audience. "Today, we close this summit not just with awards, but with a new tradition." She turned to Penelope. "This year and every year forward, we will present an award to the civilian or service member who best exemplifies marksmanship excellence paired with mentorship and moral grounding." She held up a sleek metal plaque engraved with a name that carried history. "The Lieutenant Nicole Morrison Award for Excellence in Marksmanship Training will honor those who, like Nicole and Penelope, remind us that talent alone is not enough. It must be guided, earned, shared." Penelope stood motionless. That name, her mother's name, now etched in steel, now whispered across military circles. Not as a footnote, as a legacy. When Wells placed the first medal around Penelope's neck, it wasn't just recognition. It was closure. It was the full weight of a life once lost, now living forward through the next. Asterisk. She started with a question. "Can I use the range?" She ended by changing the answer for every kid who would ask it next. The sky above Naval Station Coronado glowed with soft pink and gold, the final rays of the day touching everything with warmth. Penelope walked across the courtyard with her father and grandmother, the familiar ground under her feet now sacred. 6 months ago, she had stood there alone, clutching her mother's photograph and hoping someone would give her a chance. Now, she walked with medals around her neck, program reforms carrying her name, and kids across the country practicing her wind calculations. As they passed precision point range, she slowed down. "Dad," she said quietly, "do you think Mom would approve of all this?" Kevin looked at her for a moment. The wind played gently with her hair, and the silver trident around her neck caught the evening light. "She wouldn't just approve," he said, his voice steady. "She'd salute." Penelope didn't speak, but the tightness in her throat said more than words could. Margaret Morrison stepped beside her, calm and proud. "You've done more than honor your mother," she said. "You've carried a legacy, and you made it stronger. You've built something new, something that will outlast us all." Together, they turned toward the base housing that had become their home, not just in walls, but in belonging. Inside the modest quarters, framed photos lined the walls. One showed Nicole Morrison in uniform, grinning wide beside a much younger Margaret. Another now included Penelope holding her range certificate beside the award named after her mother. The journey had not erased the pain of losing Nicole, but it had turned that pain into something powerful. At the far end of the room, Penelope's journal sat open. On the latest page, written in clean handwriting, were 4 words: purpose, precision, patience, peace. She closed it gently. Later that week, she led a training session for new candidates, young recruits, and visiting teens alike. One girl, maybe 9 years old, stared up at her with wide eyes. "You're the one from the video," the girl whispered. Penelope smiled. "No," she said kindly. "I'm just the one who got to speak up first. You're next." As the group formed lines at the practice targets, Penelope moved through them, adjusting stances, guiding breathing, and offering encouragement without pressure. Across the base, international cooperation programs expanded. Civilian youth access protocols were now standardized at 3 major installations. Schools began using case studies based on her journey. And most of all, somewhere, a child sitting quietly, with untapped talent, now had a path, because Penelope had cleared it first.